At the Travel Dialogue podcast, our goal is to make you a smarter traveler. Now, we have all discussed a lot of tips and tricks in previous episodes, but what really happens when the rubber hits the road? And that's precisely why we'll be doing our very first interview with a travel expert. The goal here with inviting all these experts over is to make sure that we share enough advice, tips, tools, and tricks to help you during your next trip over there. Our guest today is Chris Kenton. He just came back from his third trip to India and has been there multiple times now. Lots and lots of interesting stories to share, tips about things you should know before you go to India, what he really loves about India, and why he would love to go there again and again. However, there's one particular state in India that holds a very, very special place in his heart. So, what is that? That and a lot more as we talk to Chris Kenton and discuss his travels to India. So, let's get started. All right, then. So let's welcome Chris Kenton to the podcast. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Good to be here.
Why don't you introduce yourselves to the audience? Tell a bit about yourself, what you do, who you are, where you're based out of.
Okay. My name is Chris Kenton. I'm a marketing agency owner just outside of San Francisco. I grew up in California. I'm now in my mid 50s. I've been traveling since I was in my early teens. And I'm just north of San Francisco.
So one of the things that, we've known each other for a while now, and I've seen that you must have already traveled to close to 40 countries, I guess. So tell us a bit about what really got you interested about traveling to India. Was it something during your formative years as you were growing up? Or was it something you saw on TV or read in the newspaper? And what really prompted you to plan the very first trip and actually go and see stuff?
So traveling for me started when I was in college. I took a semester abroad and I'd never traveled before outside of the United States. I went to Jamaica for a semester studying political economics and it blew my mind. I mean, just the experience of living in a foreign country as a minority, for one thing, which was pretty amazing. It gave me an immediate window into a whole world that was so different from not only what I grew up with, but it also gave me a very different view of America, seeing it from the outside. And so I was home for a month after that trip before I sold my car, quit school, and bought a one-way ticket to Europe. And that's how I got traveling. And I traveled for quite a while, went through Africa, Europe, the Middle East. And then I came home to go back to school, mostly because I started to realize how little I knew and going to places like Egypt and Turkey, where I was experiencing all of these different cultures and had very little understanding from a historical perspective about what I was experiencing, I decided to go back to school. So I went home. I never made it to India. And so what got me interested was this guy I happened to know, a friend, invited me to his wedding in Mumbai. And, it had been, by that time I had a 10-year-old kid. Obviously, I was married. I hadn't done nearly as much traveling in a long time. And so I decided to go to Mumbai and to have this amazing experience of being in an Indian wedding, seeing my friend get married, which was very cool. And then while I was there, I figured as long as I was going to be flying across the world to go to India, I should take some time to see more of it. And I somehow, I don't remember, got the idea of riding a Royal Enfield around the palaces and forts of Rajasthan. And that's how I kind of fell into the whirlpool that is India. So, yeah, that's the story.
So let's take you back to when you first landed in India. And this was way back in 2011. You land
You should
and come
remember
out of
that
the
date.
airport.
Yes.
Yeah. So you land in India, you come out of the airport. What was your first introduction to India? What were some of your first impressions compared to what you had seen or heard about before?
Wow. Well, the first thing was I remember it was hot the minute I walked out the door. This was the old Chhatrapati terminal, I believe.
Yes.
back in 2011. And I remember there were throngs of taxi drivers that were immediately descending, coming in. So that was my first impression. I got a taxi that I think took the long way into Mumbai. This was before the coastal road. So I remember it was a long drive at like 1 o'clock in the morning, and just the amazing size of Mumbai was my first impression.
Yeah, Mumbai is just chaos in order.
Yeah.
But there's one particular place. I mean, you mentioned briefly about your love for mountain biking and riding Royal Enfields as well.
Yes.
There's one particular state in India that you've fallen in love with. Tell the audience which state that is and why you like it so much.
Okay, so I know because I participate on the various tourism channels on Reddit that there's a lot of competition between the states, and all the states talk about, what's the best state for food or for history or for temples. But for me, it's hands down, it's Rajasthan. And I think, it feels like, especially when you're doing it on a Royal Enfield, when you're riding around the amazing palaces and the fort towns, and it's like you're riding through a storybook and going back in time. And there's camels on the road, and I didn't see any elephants this trip, but I've seen elephants before. It's just magic, and the people are amazingly friendly. So yeah, I fell in love with Rajasthan.
So if you compare that, I mean, just to follow up on that, if you look at the topography and the way Rajasthan is, coming from someone in the US, now I've been close to 25, 26 states in the US as well. As someone coming from the US, what is unique about Rajasthan that you cannot really get easily in the US?
Wow. Well, I mean, the very first thing that comes to mind is just the history. I mean, the history is just so profound and so present everywhere in a way that we don't have as a 200-year-old country. And, California is even younger than that. So we just don't see that. We don't have castles and palaces. And the other thing we have, some cathedrals, but we don't have temples like you do. And just the architecture. So that's all amazing. The places that I think there are places that are very similar to places in the West and in California in particular. The Aravalli Hills are very much like Napa, and that, sort of Northern California, where you have kind of these steep hills and valleys with just these stunning, stunning views. So that the Aravalli Hills reminds me a lot. We don't have anything like Udaipur. Um, there's a new road from Kumbhalgarh to Udaipur that goes north from Udaipur up to Kumbhalgarh. Brand new road, just paved. It weaves through the hills in a way that is like any road that you'd see anywhere in the world, that just is perfect. And it definitely, that reminds me of sort of the golden areas of California. Yeah. So I was just going to say that the last place in Rajasthan that, I mean, there's so many places in Rajasthan that are just mind blowing, but the Jawai leopard preserve that is out to the northwest of Udaipur is pretty magical. That feels almost like Africa. And leopards that are up on these rocks way up on the hill, these lakes that have crocodiles on the edge. You feel like you're on safari in Africa. And that's certainly something that we don't have in California. So there's a wide variety of terrain, and I just find it magical.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why it's called the Indian subcontinent, because you have one full country, but it almost has all the features of a continent. You have the snow-capped mountains, you have rivers and lakes, you have the desert, everything in a single country.
Yep.
So, from the point of view of your experience, I mean, the average traveler, let's say the average American traveler going to Rajasthan, I'm guessing that probably less than 1% of them would ride a motorbike across the desert. And what was that experience like, as opposed to, let's say, the average person who flies, takes a taxi, checks into the hotel, and then does some touristy stuff?
You get dirty, that's for one. I mean, there's no way to avoid just, you get covered with road dirt, and, so it's definitely a dirtier experience, and you have to be okay with that. You smell everything, you sometimes taste everything that's going on around you. So it's a very immersive experience. That's what I love about it. I mean, I definitely like speed and motorcycles and all that kind of stuff. And so it's exhilarating for me from the perspective that, so I'm ADD for one thing. And riding a motorcycle in some place like Jaipur, which for my money probably has the craziest traffic in India where I've been, to me, crazier than Delhi. And that is an ADD person's heaven if you ride a motorcycle, because it's just constant input and change and change. I mean, I'm a kid in a candy store, but my wife, who was riding on the back of the motorcycle, that is not her happy place. So I think she had a different experience, but that's the experience that everybody asks her about. So she's definitely, I think people see her in a different light for doing 1,000 miles on the back of a motorcycle in India than if she just gone and stayed in a hotel.
So, given that you've traveled to so many countries in the world, which other place you would say comes close to this kind of experience that you've had in terms of just the chaos and the traffic? And
Wow. Egypt is definitely chaotic. Cairo is pretty insane.
yes.
I had a taxi driver in Cairo tell me that there are no moving violations in Cairo. There are only parking violations. So if you get in an accident and you have to stop, that's the only way you're going to get a ticket. So everybody just keeps moving. So it's, I don't think it's certainly not crazier than Jaipur. Sumatra, very, very different. But when you get out of the chaos in India into some of the outer regions in between cities, that is to me a little bit more like places like Sumatra. It could be just stunning landscapes that just go on for miles.
Yeah, one of the things that we often joke about here is that in India, you don't have traffic rules, you have suggestions. And
Yeah.
people follow those suggestions based on how they feel that day.
It's alarming. So I brought my son on this trip. It was a reward for he graduated from college in December, and I told him when I came to your way, he wanted to come, and I couldn't rationalize it when he was 10 years old, especially since I hadn't been to India before. And so when I came back, he made me promise that I would take him there. And I said, if you get good grades in high school and college, I'll take you there when you graduate. And so he was good on the bargain on his side. And so this was the
Ah,
payoff. And yeah, it's pretty alarming when you first find yourself on the street in anywhere in India. Like you said, there's a zen to it. People, you can't hesitate. You have to know exactly where you're going and not be indecisive and really always telegraph where you're going and have eye contact, ideally, if you're, all of that stuff. And that takes a few incidents to kind of figure out. Like, you're just driving down the street or the highway and somebody's coming the wrong way, the other way, directly at you. Or, you see a bus coming towards you and another bus comes around it. And then another bus comes around that bus till there's three buses coming towards you you don't see that in America.
I mean, one of the things that we often used to talk about is that the very first time I went to the US about 20 years back, for the first week or so, I almost thought that it was way too quiet and way too orderly because I was not used to it. So you almost feel that you reach there and you think that things are moving so smoothly without anyone making any eye contact, without anyone honking or anyone turning the wrong way. And it's almost, I mean, in a way, it's almost disconcerting if you're used to that for 20 years of your formative years.
Yep. Yeah,
So,
it is a very different experience.
we spoke briefly about your first trip and now just made your third trip in the last month.
Yep.
Dial back and what kind of things that you see in terms of the changes or developments that you see between the first and the third trip, impressions that have changed or impressions that have remained the same?
Yeah, a lot has changed. The first thing that immediately comes to mind is just the roads. The roads have gotten so much better. There's a lot more on this trip. I don't think we spent more than probably 10 miles on unpaved roads, maybe 30 miles on unpaved roads. When I was when I was in Rajasthan in 2011, maybe it was more like a few hundred miles, especially in between Jodhpur and Udaipur. So that was kind of amazing to see, and good roads. I mean, really good roads. I rode the highway between Agra and Lucknow, and that's a highway you'd see anywhere in the world. Just a world-class bit of infrastructure that is amazing to see. So that's changed a lot. I think the economic situation has obviously changed. So I saw far less poverty in places like Mumbai, far less people with medical problems that were just on the street. So it's a completely different world. A lot more infrastructure, a lot more hotels. And in general, I feel like India is very much on its way up economically. It's really apparent just in the last, I guess it's, what is that, 20, not 20 years, 15 years. Visible progress. The other thing that was really amazing to see was the almost elimination of the dirty diesel buses in places like Mumbai that used to be everywhere all over the place, and you just see the belching out smoke all over the place. And now you see the electric buses, and I could probably count the number of diesel buses I saw on the fingers of one hand. I didn't see a lot, so that's definitely changed. Yeah, it's a little bit nostalgic. It's like, I know you've been places that I've been in, for example, in Mexico, like Playa del Carmen,
Yeah.
that, back in 1990, it was, a dirt road, and now it's almost a metropolis. And it's amazing to see that growth. And there's a little bit of, oh, it was nice when it was. And so I kind of feel a little bit about that, about parts of India, that they're being more discovered and more built up. And I'm hopeful that I mean, I know there are a lot more places that are further and further out that will take a long time to be discovered. So if you go out a little bit further, you can still find magical places. But I do see that development and go, oh yeah, everybody's traveling.
Yeah, I mean, social media contributes in a big way here. I still remember being in Goa 20, 25 years back is very different from the Goa of today.
Yeah.
A lot has changed. A lot of beaches that were not known to people are very popular thanks to Instagram and Reels and all kinds of stuff.
Right.
So yeah, you're correct about a lot of places are getting more attention.
Yeah.
Um, and there is a lot of infrastructure being built to catch up with that. And
Right.
there's always a gap every now and then. You mentioned Playa del Carmen. And I remember that while we were taking the minivan to Chichen Itza, there was actually a traffic jam outside, uh, almost 30 minutes out to Chichen Itza. And I'm guessing that that's probably something they would not have seen in the 1990s or whenever you went.
In the 1990s, you basically drove up just outside where that, I think it's the Palenque court, or not the Palenque court, but the whatever that game was. So very close to where the temple and pyramid were. There was just a dirt and gravel lot that all the big tour buses just lined up in. That was all there was. And then, I mean, they did have a ticket, little wooden shack ticket office, but that was kind of it.
Yeah. I mean, now all the cenotes have also become very popular, with people posting reels about them jumping.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So coming back to Rajasthan, so you did your very first trip to India. You also covered Rajasthan, and in your most recent trip, you went back to Rajasthan again. You also explored a few more cities this time around. Tell us about that experience and what prompted you to go to those cities this time around.
So, well, I had to make a deal with my wife since she was going to come and ride on the back of a motorcycle across Rajasthan. She wanted to see the Taj Mahal. And so the other place that we both talked about that we wanted to see was Varanasi. So we did a loop in Rajasthan. We did a loop from Jaipur. And when we got back to Jaipur, we took a car service to Agra, and then we stopped along the way to see the stepwell. And we went to see the Taj Mahal, and then we took a car service from Agra to Lucknow, and then we took a car from Lucknow to Varanasi. It was just the timing was just before Holi, so getting a train turned out to be really, really difficult. So that's why we ended up going car service from city to city to city, which was a little painful, but was the Taj Mahal it made me speechless. By the way, I'm glad that I saw it at the end of the trip in Jodhpur in Rajasthan, because I feel like it's hard to top that. It's hard to follow that. When you walk through the gate and you see the Taj Mahal in the dawn light, it looks like it's floating, and it makes you feel like you're floating. And that's kind of hard to follow. So what was great was we had gone around, Jaipur, Jodhpur, Udaipur, and Ranakpur and Bundi and all of these places, and we saw all of these temples, so that when we saw the Taj Mahal, I feel like we had a better sense of the magic of what we were seeing. It wasn't just drive right up and see it. It was like a journey to get there. and it did not disappoint. It was stunning. And so then we went on to Varanasi, mind blowing experience in an entirely different way. I had tried to find what I was thinking was we want to be as close to the Ghats as possible. And so I found a hotel that was right on the Ghats. What I didn't know was that it was actually kind of a pilgrim's hotel. And so most of the people who were staying at the hotel and who were at the restaurant of the hotel were people there who were either doing a pilgrimage there themselves for spiritual purposes, or they had a family member who had passed away and they were all there to be there to go to the name is gonna, the Ganga Arti. So that was an incredible experience.
So tell us a few things about your interactions. I mean, as I mentioned initially, that you didn't travel like the average traveler does. You didn't take a flight and then a taxi and stay at a five-star hotel. You actually went to every nook and corner on a motorbike, interacted with local people. Tell us about some of your interactions, any interesting stories that you encountered during your trip.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is almost without exception, people were just so friendly and they wanted to know where we were from, wanted to know what we thought of India, everywhere we went, without exception. And I can tell you a couple crazy stories. My son, when we were on the road to Udaipur, that fantastic road that I was telling you about that is so beautiful and so amazing and just paved, unfortunately comes to a part where it's not paved. And it's not paved for, I don't know, maybe 20 miles. And so you're on gravel and dodging cows and cars and trucks that are, working on the road. And at some point, my son's passport wallet got rattled out of his pocket and fell, and nobody noticed it. And so we get to Udaipur, like, I don't know, an hour and a half later. And it's not until we're checking in the hotel and they're asking for all our passports that my son realizes he doesn't have his. And so being the techie that he is, he had put a Apple ID tag in the passport wallet. And so he opens up his phone and there it is showing up on the map an hour north of town. So the hotel was amazing. The manager called one of their, I think he drives for them, and he made this guy my son's bodyguard. And they got a car and they drove all the way back up. It's now night time. It's like
Wow.
9 o'clock at night. And this is out in the middle of nowhere. They drove right up to it just as a multi-ton dump truck was backing up to drop gravel right on the spot where his little wallet was sitting in the dirt. And so they literally got there in time to, wave down the truck, stop, stop, stop. And, they didn't even need a flashlight because the Apple tag, starts beeping as he gets close to it. And so he just walks right up and finds it. What was amazing, so everybody was just like, this is impossible. I mean, how crazy is this? But then the guy who drove my son there and back invited us over to his house to meet his family. They cooked lunch for us, drove us all around Udaipur to see everything. I mean, just lovely, lovely people. And we found experiences like that everywhere. It was fantastic.
So what kind of questions did you encounter about, I mean, when you told them that you are from the US, what common questions? Anything funny or anything that stood out?
Well, I mean, there were certainly questions about our current political situation and our current leaders, more along the lines of, what do you think is going to happen than, comments one way or another. I think most of the questions were people wanted to know what we thought of India. I mean, that was really what most of the questions were. And, I think people were delighted that I mean, without exception, everyone in my family just thought India was amazing. And that was, when you tell that to people, you can see the pride that people take in their country, I think with good reason. I mean, there's just, there's so much to offer. So people wanted to know, I think they wanted to share in our excitement, maybe is a way to put it.
Yeah, that's a very common thing when you travel around and you talk to local people. The moment they hear good things about their state or city, they will go out of the way to help you out. They just love it when you say that, oh, I am in this new city and this is fantastic. And they will go the extra mile to help you out and be really hospitable.
Yep. And we never had to exaggerate.
Yeah, in most cases, that's all they want to hear. And
Right.
people can usually tell if you're not being genuine and
Right.
if you're just faking it,
Yep.
because they are locals. They know exactly what's good and what's bad in their city. So if you
Yep.
say something which is not really good and you keep praising it to the skies, then they will find out immediately. So let's get back to some of the experiences that you just shared. And that brings us to this whole concept of, when we grow up, and you mentioned that right at the outset that traveling has changed the way you think about the world, the way you think about your own country as well. So before you came to India, what were some of the common stereotypes or misconceptions that you heard of, or something that you had in your mind, and what changed?
You mean in terms of misconceptions about India? So, I mean, obviously, India is the most populous country on the planet. And so I think a lot of the misconception about India that people have, and I certainly had, is you kind of have this image of your mind more of the chaos of the really densely packed cities. And that kind of becomes the image that gets in your mind. I mean, obviously, you see the Taj Mahal, but I think there's very much that sort of impression that it's all chaos. And I think that scares a lot of people. And what I found was that the minute that you get outside of any of the big cities, it opens up so much. And that was really surprising to me to see how big the spaces are between cities and how big not just the country is in population, but how big it is. So that misconception changed a lot for me. I mean, what I always thought of India as sort of the images of Mumbai and kind of I guess, just that density. And now what I think of more is the open desert, the beautiful Aravalli Hills, things that are less that sort of congested image.
Yeah, I've had friends who have traveled from the US who had the same impression. So if you particularly travel for work, what happens is more often than not, you end up, let's say, as a European or American, flying to Bangalore, Mumbai, Hyderabad, Delhi. And if you have a busy week and you have meetings, at the end of the week, you tend to go back. So the impression that a lot of people have about India is just traffic and chaos and, as you said, very densely populated areas. But if you actually look at, and your point was correct, where even people living in the cities, if you look at people living in Mumbai or Delhi, they will all have some kind of a farmhouse or a retreat somewhere slightly outside. So let's say about 100 kilometers or 75 kilometers outside Mumbai. And you will see them drive over to those farmhouses or places on the weekends sometimes just to get a break from the chaos of the city. And as you correctly mentioned, so they're within a given state as well, not just Rajasthan, all around the country. There are enough places where you can probably drive for about a couple of hours and get away from all that chaos and traffic.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I felt like the hill station, Mount Abu, outside of Udaipur. The entire area around that is as open as anything that I can think of in California. I mean, just wide open spaces. You can drive for miles without seeing anyone. That, like I said, that was very much not the stereotype that I was expecting.
So I knew that you were meticulously planning before you made your trip to India, because this time you're traveling with your family as opposed to previous trips when you're traveling solo. Explain to the audience some of the steps and the approach that you took towards planning your trip and how it helped you. And also maybe go over a couple of things that you thought you missed, and maybe you will do that at the better next time when you plan a trip to India.
Yeah, so I definitely use a lot of technology. So I've planned a couple trips now with ChatGPT, enough to sort of bang my head against the wall, figuring out what works with ChatGPT and what doesn't. So there are some really cool things that you can do with ChatGPT, but you have to really kind of push it in a bit of a different way. So if you just go to ChatGPT and say, come up with an itinerary for me for 5 days around Delhi, it'll actually do a pretty good job if all you want to do is do sort of the standard tourist thing. And so it's got mountains and mountains of information to rely on because so many people do those same itineraries. If you want what everyone else has done, ChatGPT is great for that. ChatGPT is really bad at distances. It makes distances up. Again, if it's a distance that lots and lots of people travel, and so it can find lots and lots of instances of people going from Delhi to Agra, it'll be pretty accurate about the time and the distance. But if it's any place that's not really well trodden, like even let's say uh, Jaipur to Ajmer, or out to Bundi, there aren't enough people that go those places. And so it winds up just making things up. And it'll say something that maybe is only, let's say 200 kilometers is 600 kilometers. And so if you're not paying attention to that, you can really get screwed up and you can't believe what it says about anything. You have to verify it. So what I would do is I would say, okay, here's my planned itinerary. I'm going to do Udaipur, Chittorgarh, Bundi, Ajmer. What I want you to do is to tell me what places I should see along the way, what's maybe off the beaten path. If I wanted to do this in a different way, what are some of the other roads that I might take? Should I take a state highway or should I take a back road? And it can give you ideas. And then once you verify those ideas, which I would go and do, and I would plug it into Google Earth. So I would get an itinerary and then I would build that itinerary on Google Earth by putting in the towns and the distances, and Google Earth will actually give you the roads and you can kind of map it out. Where it all kind of falls apart, which is really disappointing, is it'd be really cool if you could just take Google Earth and translate that to Google Maps so that when you switch to traveling and, hey, now I'm in India and you're looking at Google Maps, you have your whole Google Earth itinerary. You have to go through a lot of steps to kind of make that sort of happen. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really happen. What happens is you have to download all of your maps onto Google. They're in your downloaded maps. But when you're on the ground in India, Google is sort of based on always being connected. And so when it's not connected, it kind of doesn't know what to do. And you have to you're trying to constantly tell it, go to my downloaded map, and it doesn't really work. So that's where it kind of all falls apart. So now what I do is I usually have kind of an itinerary in mind. I start with, okay, well, what's the broad strokes of what you should see if you're going to go to Rajasthan? How could you plan this as an itinerary? I'll do that back and forth maybe with ChatGPT. And then I'll go to guidebooks and look those places up, because often what ChatGPT thinks is cool is not what I'm going to like. So I'll look at it in the guidebook and see, okay, is that really something I want to do? I'll prioritize it. And then I'll go back to ChatGPT and say, no, I don't want to go there. I want to go here. You kind of negotiate it. And then once you get that itinerary and you block it out on Google Maps, from that point, I think it's really important to have paper backup copies so that when you find yourself somewhere and your phone's not working, or,
Or you lose your passport.
Exactly. Exactly. So what I did is I made paper copies of everything. And then I also put everything on the cloud so that if whatever happened and I got to a hotel, I could just on the concierge computer get into a Google Drive and get whatever I needed. I mean, that actually helped once when I made a big mistake and uh, I booked a hotel for the right day but the wrong month, and they were it was Dev Niwas in Bundi, and they were so kind. They were like, do you have your reservation? And I'm like, yeah, I do. And I get the paper reservation, and then he looks at it and goes, this is for next month. So that was the one mistake I made, but yeah, have everything printed out and backup copies of everything.
So did you use any specific apps while you were on the road that helped you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely used Google Translate for sure. We used Airlo, so that was the what do you call it? The cell and data service that we got, which was very, very reasonably priced. I think we paid, it was only like $20 for a 30-day unlimited data plan. I might be wrong. It was in that ballpark, which for my plan, I have AT&T, a US based carrier, and they would charge me $12 a day. I use that. It's a nice failover because they have a complete network. And the one time that Airlo did not work when we were out in the middle of nowhere and needed access, I was able to fall over to that, and they charge you by the day. So it was only a one-time charge. So redundant connection is what I would definitely recommend, especially if you're out somewhere on a motorcycle in the middle of nowhere. Having backup ways to connect. So we had Airlo and then a backup with our own carrier.
So you mentioned Google Translate. Did you have any interesting stories while trying to overcome language barriers or people trying to understand your accent or you trying to understand what they're saying?
So the only time that we had an issue, I mean, there were certainly times where it was obviously we they didn't speak English, and I certainly couldn't say much more than namaste. And so you learn certainly a lot to communicate where you don't really need language. But the one time that that really was not possible was when I had a motorcycle breakdown and they needed to understand what were the, what was it that was making noise. And, we had to talk about what the plan was going to be. And so then we had to use Google Translate, but they know how to use it as well as I did. And so, it was not a barrier. That certainly is, that's a big change from the last time I was there, the last couple times I was there, for sure.
Yeah, we had this experience in Bogota, Colombia, and you're so used to speaking in a certain way, and you land up in Colombia assuming that people will still understand
Yeah.
broken English, and almost no one understood English.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how we could still somehow communicate just through body language and just looking into people's eyes and trying to explain things to them. We got by somehow. It was never an issue about safety or any of those things. It's just that, let's say you took a wrong turn and you got lost and you want to ask someone, and people were very friendly obviously, but they did not understand a single word about
Yep.
what you were trying to tell them, other
Yep.
than basic things like, say, bus, train, or whatever, airport.
I got really, really far on Zonyabad. People
Oh, there you go.
were their eyes just lit up like, you tried, which was great.
Yeah, I had this experience at Frankfurt Airport once, back when I was still speaking German quite frequently and with decent amount of capability. You know how huge Frankfurt Airport is. And I
Yep.
went to one of the counters, and this would probably be something like 2009 or 10. I immediately spoke some very basic German, and you should have seen the face of that person at the counter. She just smiled ear to ear because, I mean, all of a sudden in the middle of nowhere, she was not expecting a brown guy to walk up and speak in decent German and ask her a question. So, I mean, when you travel enough, I mean, you come across a lot of these stories, which are very interesting, and it always contributes to your personal growth. I can definitely see that from my very first trip to Egypt, which was my very first trip outside India. I have definitely changed as a person living and traveling abroad. If you were to maybe look at a few things personally, looking at 30 years of travel around the world, what are the things that you have learned and how it has changed you as a person in terms of just your personal growth?
Getting outside your own world, I mean, that was my first experience when I went to Jamaica. First of all, I'd never been outside the United States. And second of all, I had an idea in my mind of who the United States was in the world based on the education system in which I grew up, which was America's the good guys, helps people in the world. And we're a good big brother to, our neighbors in the Caribbean and in South America. And it wasn't until I stepped foot outside of the United States. And for another thing, as I mentioned, was a minority on campus in Kingston, that gave me an entirely different reality. Seeing the economic mechanisms, for example, that the US had used in relationship with countries that produce goods for us, and realizing that, maybe we're a little exploitive, maybe we're leveraging things a little bit, and seeing how people in places like Jamaica, where people can be impoverished by that system, and how they view America. I mean, it completely changed the trajectory of my life to see that. And so continuing to travel, I'm always amazed at how, notwithstanding all the news that we hear that should make us afraid of every other country in the world, there's always a reason to be fearful about traveling. And yet, every time I travel, I meet people who are extraordinarily open and warm. I mean, yeah, you run into some situations from time to time. And certainly there's some scary situations that can happen. But overwhelmingly, I meet people who have similar fears, similar struggles, are often looking at the world in a way that I've never considered before. And so that always, it kind of gives me hope for humanity, that beyond the shores of our little world, that we only think of politics and everything that's going on, people are actually pretty normal everywhere in the world.
I mean, a lot of the stereotypes that we all have in some way or the other come from the news that we have consumed over the years. And one of the things that I love to do when I'm traveling is maybe just hang out at a coffee shop somewhere and just have a cup of coffee and observe what's going on. And let's take the example of two countries that are very different from each other. You go to Vietnam. I was sitting in this coffee shop in Vietnam, which was slightly elevated, maybe like a second floor. They had a nice place to sit outside on the patio, and you could see Hanoi city, the traffic and the chaos. And then I did the same again in Bogota. Bogota has amazing coffee culture as well. And you pretty much see that people are almost the same everywhere. You will see people in a rush to go to work. You will see parents dropping their kids to school. I mean, just the usual stuff. Someone
Yeah.
arguing over a traffic stop,
Yep.
some road work going on. So I mean, barring some of the major political upheavals, I mean, people in these countries are just leading normal lives.
Yep.
So beyond a certain point, there isn't much merit to a lot of the stereotypes that we hear about.
I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, it is that idea that people really are kind of the same everywhere. Well, I'll tell you one thing that was different that I very much appreciated on this trip to India is I mean, certainly having been to India before, I knew that there were lots and lots of temples and shrines, everywhere you go. And I knew that intellectually. And yet this time, what I noticed that I had not really noticed before was just the depth of devotion that the vast majority of people have that is kind of alien in the United States. And what I mean by that is we kind of have a culture where you go to church on Sunday and you try obviously to be good and to live your faith or your religion at home, but it's not like it is in India where it's just a natural part of the fabric of everyday life, which for me on this trip was much more noticeable, especially when we went to Varanasi. And it wasn't that I had to understand what people believe because I don't fully understand it. I mean, I've certainly read lots of books on Hinduism and different aspects of different strands of Hinduism and Buddhism. Not enough to even believe for a moment that I understand it, but I don't need to understand it to be able to see that devotion the way that it shows up in people's lives every day. The guy who looks like he works at a bank going to do his, pujas at a shrine. That really hit me on this trip in a way that I hadn't seen before. And I very, very much appreciated it. I don't know. I get that it's just Dharma, but to me, it was kind of profound just to see how much of how pervasive it was in people's lives.
I don't remember where I read this, but it was a very interesting quote that in certain places of the world, you will see that culture flows downstream from religion, and in certain places, religion flows downstream from culture. So I
Okay.
guess in India, what you'll see that there is a unique culture that is there for each and every state, and you will see variances of religious practices or spiritual practices adopted to that particular state. So let's say you have been to Rajasthan, and you go down south, you go further east, you will see all these different practices. They might be practicing the same faith, but they have very different ways in the way they practice the faith, and you will see a stark contrast.
Yeah. And there was a wonderful old lady who was tending a shrine in Kumbhalgarh. So, you got a big fort, you got some big buildings, and people walk up and down around the palace and the ramparts. And in the palace, they had a shrine, I think, to Shiva that was just in a little room that probably, in the palace was, some little storeroom or something. But there was a woman that was out front who was tending the shrine, and she took me in and took me into the shrine to show it to me. And I mean, the walls were completely covered with soot that probably had candles that had been going on in there for probably hundreds of years, as far as I know. I mean, it was just amazing. And she just showed me everything, showed me I think the ghee candle, and just was explaining it to me. And I had a similar experience in Pushkar at the Brahma temple, which blew my mind. I mean, I know you've been to Utah in Salt Lake City. You can't go into the temple. They don't just let people off the street. Hey, come on into the temple and, see our most holy objects. The only way you get into the temple is if you've got the credentials, you got to have like a letter from the president just to get into the temple. And in Pushkar, it was like, just take your shoes off and put them off out here, and people are kind of bringing you in and show you, here's where you can actually see, darshan. And I was, that was mind-boggling to me. Just because you wouldn't, very few religions that I can think of that they would allow you to experience their most holy place and welcome you to see that. So that was pretty amazing.
I think you see that quite a lot around Southeast Asia as well, where a lot of the Buddhist temples that we have been to, even let's say in Thailand, they have very easy access. You can just go. I think the only thing that in most cases, and this is there in India as well as in a lot of parts of Southeast Asia, is that the only restriction or the only rule that they have is that you should be modestly dressed. So
Yep.
they don't want people showing up in shorts and flip flops and
Yeah.
in tank tops at the
Yep.
temple. That's the
Yeah.
only restriction that they have in most
Yep.
cases.
Yeah. Yeah. So my only disappointment was in Udaipur. I'm trying to remember, there's a, not Jaigar, there's a temple that starts with a J that when I was there the first time had a little Ganesha shrine on the side of the wall. Very tiny. It wasn't a whole, to do. It was just a little shrine that was, carved into the wall, but it was very well tended, I remember. And when my son got his wallet back, I was like, oh, I'm going to go find that Ganesha shrine and, just, go and see if it's still there. And unfortunately, that was gone. So apparently they told me after the pandemic that a lot of Udaipur had changed and a lot of those little old, I guess they had renovated some of those buildings for more, for more commerce and more retail space. But I was very
That's
happy
always
with Ganesha.
It's always a challenge when you're trying to develop a place for tourism. At the same time, you don't want to overcrowd it. And what happens a lot of times is the place really loses its essence if it's over tourism.
That's a challenge. Yeah, it is a challenge.
All right, then. So let's get to the very fun segment now. We're going to do a rapid fire round with you.
All right.
And we have to quickly think on your feet and
All right.
give an answer. So the very first question, if there is one Indian dish that you could eat every day, what would that be?
Dal makhani.
Oh, dal makhani. And would that be with rice or roti? What would you prefer?
Roti, for sure.
Okay. Chai or coffee?
Chai when I'm in India, but I drink coffee every day. And my wife is learning to make chai. So, but it's not as easy as coffee.
So what kind of tea did you have? Was it mainly like ginger chai, masala chai? What was
Masala chai mostly.
Nice. On the street side in the small pots. So what's the one word or phrase that you picked up, a local Indian phrase that you picked up during your trip this time around, which you didn't know about before?
Phrase. Well, pikaya. That's kind of it. My language capabilities are really, really bad.
So you came back to the US. What was the one thing that you missed about India right after you came back?
The little dessert balls that are soaked in honey.
The gulab jamun.
Wow. Yeah, I could. Those are dangerous.
Okay, dosa or butter chicken?
Man, if it's really, really good butter chicken, I'd have to go with the butter chicken. But I love dosa.
Taj Mahal or Rajasthan's forts?
If I had to choose, I would still go back to Rajasthan. If I had to choose between the two, I'd say, but that's because I've seen the Taj Mahal. And I would still go back to Rajasthan.
What's the spiciest food that you've eaten so far in India?
There's a Rajasthani dish that's like butter chicken, but it's a little bit different and has chilies in it. And that was the closest I came to shedding a tear. I don't know unfortunately I don't remember what the name of it was, but it was quite spicy.
So tell us about that experience that you had while dining in Udaipur. What was that like? You tried out some new restaurant this time around as well?
So, we were trying to find one sort of exceptional restaurant while we were in Rajasthan to sort of have a celebration dinner for the trip and for my son graduating from college. And so we found this restaurant called Saya in Udaipur, and it's exquisite. It's world class. It's just outside the town, sort of the built up part of Udaipur. It's actually behind it looks like a fabrication plant of some type where they're doing lots of heavy welding and machinery. And so you drive through this gate and you're looking around going, what is this place? And then you come around the back and there's these terraced gardens where they grow a lot of the food that they cook. And then also they grow food that they barter. And so the chef, I think, is from Ladakh. And the concept is it's like high cuisine of Indian food. So it was 11 courses and every course was just exquisite. They had For example, lots of things that were very unusual. Like they had the hand blown glass coffee makers where you make a single cup that have like a Bunsen burner. They use those instead for making a vegetable soup. So they bring it to your table and you're watching it bubble up from the bottom into the glass with this beautiful amber color. And, the smell of onion. I mean, just amazing. They had these little dumplings that I think were lamb. They had an amazing a lotus leaf kind of granite, like a frozen, not really, it's not ice cream, it's not gelato, but it's like a frozen ice that was from some berry from some plant served on a lotus leaf. Just every moment. And the service was literally, it would be a Michelin star restaurant in any major city. And it's just way out in the boondocks of Udaipur. It's called Saya, and it is absolutely world class. We had such a good time.
So, what's your favorite way to travel to India? Is it via Asia or Europe?
Either one is fine. I think what I've learned is I didn't do it on this trip and kind of paid the price. Stopping someplace in between for even just a day can really help a lot. So we didn't on this trip. It was like we flew from San Francisco to Amsterdam. I think we had 2 hours in Amsterdam, if that's literally just enough time to go from the arrival gate to the departure gate for the next flight to fly to Mumbai. That's kind of painful. So my preference is whether you go east or whether you go west, to find a place where you can leave the airport, spend a day, maybe 2 days if you can, if it's someplace interesting enough to see. But I think that's the part that I overlooked this time, spending all my time looking at India. And then it was just like, okay, get in and get out. And I need to think more deeply about that. The idea was I wanted to spend every day, in India, but there were a couple of days where I was just wiped out. So I think having a little bit more of a break along the way would be helpful.
Well, at least now you have direct flights. I remember back over the years, we used to fly mainly via Singapore or Dubai, and that was quite convenient because whenever you used to get a break, Singapore is pretty good. It's just in terms of not just the city, but the airport as well. It's very well equipped for precisely that. People who are having long layovers want to fly to Australia, New Zealand, US, wherever.
Yep.
So the very last question then, one of, let's say your friend, your neighbor, or your coworker meets you down the street and he's heading to the airport as he's flying to India. If you only had to give him one piece of advice, what would that be?
Wow. I think the one piece of advice that I would probably give somebody, if it's a first time visitor to India, the one thing I would advise is move out of the main cities more quickly than you otherwise would. I think if you've been to India, and the danger of, I see a lot of people that make itineraries where they've got a lot of days in Mumbai or a lot of days in Delhi and they've never been to India before. And what I always think is you get just outside the city and so much of the chaos that makes it hard to process what you're seeing goes away, and you can experience a lot more of the magic of India. And if you experience that magic, you're coming back. And so when you come back, hey, maybe now's a good time to see the Red Fort or something like that, or go out to Elephanta Island, which is quite beautiful. But I feel like if people spend too much time just, go to Delhi, take the bus to Agra to see the Taj Mahal, and then go back to Delhi, it's like you've missed a lot of what makes India so amazing. And you may just check it off your list and say, I saw the Taj Mahal and woohoo, I'm done. And you'll miss everything that is, not everything, but you'll miss a lot that I think India has to offer. So get out of the big towns quickly, see it, and then come back and explore again.
Yeah, this kind of also brings me back to the very first time I went to the US. And growing up, the only exposure because of the media was that we had this impression about Disneyland or the Statue of Liberty or Wall Street or Hollywood. So for me, growing up, the primary impressions about the US were just Hollywood and Wall Street. And make no mistake, I love New York City. I love going there multiple times. But then as I started driving a lot around the US and started visiting national parks, I just saw some amazing things, which are things that I remember a lot more fondly than simply going to Wall Street and taking that picture next to that bull.
Yep.
So, I mean, just driving through Yellowstone, for example, just fascinating, looking at all the wildlife. You can just spend hours and hours. Some really beautiful hikes. As you said, you have all these big cities that create an impression, but there's so much to see in every country.
Yep. Very true.
All right, then, Chris, thank you so much for your time. I think we had a fantastic conversation, getting more insights into your third trip to India. We are looking forward to having you back sometime soon. So, for the benefits of our audience, tell us where they can find you and follow you with your travels and your musings about tech and travel.
So I'm on Instagram, Chris P. Kenton, and I post pictures from home and from when I travel. Probably too many mountain biking pictures, but a lot of pictures of California. And then I'm on LinkedIn. I've got a company called Motive Lab. I write on the blog at Motive Lab about technology, but easily found on LinkedIn and on Instagram.
All right, then. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you soon in India and maybe do one more episode with you about your fourth trip to India as well.
And for those of you that didn't figure it out, it was Ashish's wedding that I went to back in 2011.
Yes, indeed. All right. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you soon. All right. We hope you had a lot of fun listening in to that conversation with Chris. I sure had a lot of fun learning about his experiences, some really, really interesting stories about travel around India, some really cool tips and tricks, knowledge about AI and applications. If you like this episode, then please subscribe to the Travel Dialogue podcast on YouTube. You can also follow us on X and Instagram at travel_dialogue. You can support the podcast by using one of our links via PayPal and other partners. You will find all the links in the description below. That wraps up yet another episode of the Travel Dialogue podcast. We hope you had a lot of fun. We'll see you again in the next episode. Until then, have a good one and take care.